Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Moms Like Me podcast powered by SupportNow. I'm back with an incredible guest today, president and founder of Love Chloe and Monkey in My Chair, which I'm so excited to talk more about. So I would like to welcome our guest, Heidi Feyerherm-Smith. Welcome, Heidi.
Thank you for having me.
Heidi, you have such an incredible story, and I love both of the organizations that you have started and funded and poured your heart into. But I know that there is an incredible story behind both of these organizations. So if you will, I'd love for you to share more about you and frankly what brought you to this space.
In 2006, my 6-year-old daughter, Chloe, was diagnosed with DIPG, which is diffuse intrinsic pontine glioma, which is essentially a mouthful. But it meant that she had cancer in her brainstem. And so with that diagnosis, we were actually told by the hospital when she was first diagnosed that we could just go home and that there wasn't really viable treatments for this sort of cancer with kids. And I was blown away. I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that there were kids being diagnosed with types of cancer that really had no treatment options. So we did choose to do treatment and went through radiation treatment, which is kind of the standard of care, which actually even today is still the standard of care that many years later. So she went through treatment, radiation treatment. We had a few good months, and then her tumor started to grow again. So we had to start looking into different options. And we live in Salina, Kansas, so in the middle of Kansas. And so her treatment was 3 hours away in Kansas City. And then we ended up traveling to Houston to get some more experimental treatment, which gave us a couple good months. But ultimately, her tumor started to grow again. And we had to come to that decision. Do we stay in Houston and try other treatments, or, do we go back home? And Chloe just wanted to be at home. She wanted to go to school. She wanted to be with her friends. And that was what was important to her. So we decided ultimately to let her enjoy those last weeks that she had at home with her friends and going to school as much as she could. So unfortunately, Chloe did pass away about 11 months after her initial diagnosis, which is very typical of this disease. DIPG affects 200 to 300 children in the U.S. every year. They're usually between the ages of 6 and 8, and their battles are usually between 10 and 12 months. Now, that was when she was diagnosed. We are seeing a little bit longer survivability, but it's still pretty much the same as 2006.
Yeah, I've become familiar with DIPG throughout my journey with SupportNow, and it really is one of those diagnoses that you hear, and it's hard to swallow because the options are so limited. And it is incredible, as you mentioned, that there's so little people that know about it. I feel like you hear about leukemia, you hear about certain cancers, but given just the aggressiveness of DIPG, I'm always surprised how little attention it gets. And perhaps that's just because it doesn't affect as many kids, but it's still obviously very, very personal when it happens to you. Heidi, I know it is so hard to look back on those days. And I do think people are naturally curious, like, how did you know that something was wrong? And what were the cues that you said, okay, we need to take a closer look at this. Chloe is not herself.
I didn't notice anything at first. And it was one of my sisters had come to visit for the weekend. And she's like, oh, yeah, Chloe's smile looks different. There's something different. And it was such a kind of a slow progression of, onset that I didn't notice it personally.
Wow.
And my sister, as soon as she saw her, she's like, there's something different. So then we started asking her, hey, can you smile? Can you do this? And at that point, I was like, oh, yeah, there's definitely something going on. There's something different. But it appeared like a Bell's palsy. So there was a little bit of facial paralysis on the right side. And so I was like, yeah, this looks like might be Bell's palsy. And so we took her into urgent care, and they said, well, it looks like Bell's palsy, but we've really never seen this in a child before. But we'll go ahead and treat it like Bell's palsy. So at that point, I probably should have said, oh, maybe we should see like a pediatric neurologist. But at the time, where we live, we're not in a large city, there wasn't those sort of resources available
Right.
to us. So it wasn't like without traveling, an hour and a half to 3 hours, to see a specialist. So we just went ahead and treated it like that. And then a couple weeks after, we realized that she didn't have hearing on that side either. And at that point, our primary care doctor said, "It's definitely not Bell's palsy. Let's do a scan." And she had an MRI, and within probably an hour of the MRI, I had a phone call. So
Wow.
at that point, I knew it was something serious. And so we were then referred to Kansas City to find out, more about her diagnosis.
How did you take it? How did she take it?
Kids are very resilient. I feel like she didn't skip a beat. I mean, she was just kinda like, "Okay, let's go to Kansas City." I, on the other hand, was a mess, I feel like. I was a single parent at the time, so, when something like that happens, I didn't have another parent to kinda, share that load with, and so, I had to rely a lot on my family, my parents, and my siblings to kinda step in, but luckily, I had one of my sisters was living in Kansas City at the time, so we were able to
Mm.
go and stay with her. And so we felt like we were, with family, and hearing that diagnosis. I was just I you could everything kind of becomes a blur, I guess, during those times. And they always say, "Oh, you got to take someone with you to appointments because you won't remember anything," and that is absolutely true. Like it's just kind of like the first thing you hear, and if you hear there's really not any viable treatments, anything after that is kind of just out the window because your mind is racing with, "Oh my gosh, what do we do?" And they said, "Oh, well, you might have a good year." And I mean, that's not a lot of time, you know? And so when you hear that your child has a year to live, I mean, it's just yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just unimaginable. And like you said, I'm sure it was such a blur that it's hard to remember all of the details because it sounds like for you, you went into this mode of, well, I'm going to try to extend her quality of life for as long as possible.
Yeah.
And I'm going to hope that maybe there's an exception, there's a miracle. Would that be an accurate way of summarizing your chosen approach on this?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, going into something like that, like I, of course, did all the research and everything I could find said there's about a 10% survival. And so, although on the other side there's a 90% fatality, you're focused so much on that 10%, and my child is going to be in that 10%. And so you really just have to focus on kind of that and staying positive and just hoping for the best outcome because there are survivors. There's not a lot, but you do hear about children that have survived this every now and then. So
Heidi, how did you take care of yourself in that year? Did you? So much of my heart behind this conversation is trying to understand if, God forbid, someone finds themselves in their shoes or someone that they know someone that's in the beginning of this, how they should be supporting that person. So I'd love to for you to share a little bit more about what you needed and what people could have done in those days to just give you a little bit of help, a little bit of support.
I think just knowing that people were paying attention and they were reaching out, and even though people will tell you all the time, "Oh, just let me know what you need." Well, when you're in that position, you don't tell people what you need. You just don't. So when someone would just show up with, a couple pizzas for dinner, and I didn't ask for it, but I knew I could still use that,
Mhm.
and so just kind of doing those small things like, gifting someone a massage or something, where they're going to have to take that time to use it or, you know, just for themselves, and just doing those little things, it makes a difference, and it kind of helps them to refocus on themselves. I think with my situation being a single parent, I don't feel like I really had time to think about caring for myself because I had two children, and I had to take care of a household. So it was difficult.
And did you work?
So at the time, I was actually working part-time and attending school full-time. So I was trying to finish up my degree. So I had to take a break from work, and probably within that 11 months, I probably only worked a few months
Yeah.
out of that time just because going to appointments and whatnot, and radiation treatment and all that, it just was not, I was not able to work. And so I relied on my community. Like, my workplace did several fundraisers for me, fundraisers in the community. I would have lost my home, and I don't know where I would have been if I didn't have that support from my community.
Wow. Part of what I think is so astonishing about what you're sharing is what you mentioned at earlier, which is that for her, she was a 6-year-old kid who just wanted to be with her friends. And I think that when people hear this cancer diagnosis, all you could envision is, wrapped up in cords in a hospital. But behind all of that is really, in between treatments, kids oftentimes go home, and there is space and there is time. Can you just elaborate a little bit more about, how Chloe was like with her friends, how her friends were for her? Because I think, to your point, I think there's so much we can learn about how to support one another from how our kids support each other, and the beauty and their innocence and their ability to kind of see past it all.
I think she just wanted to be treated the same, and although there was, when you're going through cancer treatments, she didn't do a typical chemotherapy treatment. So she didn't lose her hair. She didn't look like a cancer patient, but you still did need to be careful, about getting sick and things like that. But I mean, she would still continue to be invited to birthday parties and be included in things like that, which meant a lot to her. Being included, and in the classroom as well, which is how I developed the Monkey in My Chair program. When she was first diagnosed, the hospital gave us a bear to go and sit in the classroom, and we called that bear Chloe Bear. And Chloe Bear even had a radiation mask made for her, so it mimicked what Chloe was going through, and so we could explain to the kids, what was going on. And so Chloe Bear went to school and took her place and went on field trips, and her teacher would send us photos of Chloe Bear in the library or at recess or doing various activities. And so she felt like she was still part of that classroom, and her friends knew that they could send a note in Chloe Bear's backpack, and that would make it home. And her brother, who was 2 years older at the time, the siblings really suffer as well with a cancer diagnosis, because the child going through the treatment, it's hard. That is hard, but also the other children left at home, and they don't understand, like, why are they getting all the presents? Why are they getting all the treatment? Why are they getting all the attention? So it's really hard for some kids to understand. But so he had the responsibility of taking Chloe Bear to school every week and bringing Chloe Bear home. So he felt important, and like he had, a role in everything as well. And so something like that it was really important to us, and kind of filled that hole there of being connected with the schools. So
Yeah.
that actually is what then inspired me to start Monkey in My Chair.
I think it's such an amazing story. And again, I've seen these bears. They're so adorable. And it's such a tangible way for people to feel included and a part of the journey of it all. Before we jump into Love Chloe and more about Monkey in My Chair, I am curious, when she ultimately passed, was it surreal? I mean, I know everyone said, this was going to happen, and doctors had warned you, you may have a good year. But explain to me, like, what did that actually feel like after a year of fighting?
I never let myself really go there, if that makes any sense. Throughout the whole battle, looking back on it, there was a significant decline in her physical abilities, like to walk and to talk, and going through it and being right in the midst of it, I didn't see it for what it was. I was like, oh, well, I know what she's saying, even though someone else coming over to the house to visit, they were like, they were, I think, taken back a little bit, because they were like, wow, like she has a significant decline. And I wasn't letting myself really accept that. So when she did ultimately pass, I feel like I was shocked. I was really just in denial that could have been an outcome, even though I feel like people on the outside that had even visited us within that last week knew that was, that was it was close. But I mean, we were doing treatments up until the end. We had opted, even though we came home and we knew we weren't doing any real active treatment, we had opted for a IV vitamin C treatment that was kind of an alternative treatment that was available just an hour away. And so we were like, well, it's not going to hurt us, And so we were doing pretty much anything we could just to kind of extend that just even a little bit. But it was definitely a surreal experience to go through. And
Yeah, and I asked that question because, to your point, I think on the outside looking in, when you can have a rational mind, I think part of what people do is they think, well, maybe she feels relief. Maybe she's better than we might think because she's had this data that indicates this, or because she's had time to prepare. And I think what you said is so important, and it's such a great reminder that you can throw all the data out there that paints the worst picture in the world. And more often than not, as a mom, you're never going to give up on hope. And you can't. You cannot relinquish to the data because you have to be sturdy for her and for the rest of your family. And so I say that because as supporters, it's so important to realize that while in your rational brain, it may feel different, or you may be thinking for the person that's actually enduring this, it's probably very, very different.
yeah, and I've even seen that from the other side now, where you see another family going through that, and you know that the end is probably near. But I can also relate to the parent who's thinking it's still not going to happen. This is
Right.
still not a reality. And when that does happen, I mean, it just tears you apart. And I remember feeling like I was never going to be okay. Like I just knew. I swore up. I was like, there is never going to be a day that I don't cry. There's never going to be a day that I am just not broken. And slowly, eventually, that feeling, got less and less. And I found myself, actually, picking up those pieces and making the best I could with, I knew I had to go forward. And that also, I think, just gave me that motivation to like, I've got to help other people.
Yeah.
Like, I could just go back to my job and, finish my degree and do all these other things. But I was like, I don't think that's my direction. I don't think that's where I'm supposed to be anymore. So
Yeah. Well, tell us. So, she passed, and like you mentioned before, just it sounds like excruciating grief, difficult to process, and you ultimately did make a decision to pour your heart in a different direction. So, tell everyone more about where you started and what Love Chloe, and then elaborate more on Monkey in My Chair.
So one thing that's kind of interesting is when Chloe was first diagnosed, it was 2006. And Facebook had just kind of started. There was not the social media that it is today.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know any other families. I didn't know anyone else going through this, which is completely different today, where there's all sorts of groups. And I mean, you can search DIPG and you're going to find 100 other families that you can connect with, at different stages. But so I felt really isolated in that journey, just not knowing anyone else and not being able to compare her to anyone else either. So right after, I was like, I've got to fund research. I've got to find a cure. This is, just not acceptable. And so I decided to start the foundation, and we decided to call it the Love Chloe Foundation, since we felt like it was her gift, her kind of saying, love Chloe. This is from me. To everyone else. And so we, that was kind of our first hurdle that we came across, as I was in this mindset of, oh, I'm going to start a foundation. I'm going to start a charity. I'm going to reach out, and this, lawyers and accountants are just going to help me. And that was not the case. So I learned pretty quickly that, there was like this lawyer over here wanted $2,500 to set up a nonprofit. Well, I was starting with nothing, absolutely nothing, and so and I didn't have any reserves in my finances to be able to start the foundation. So I was like, okay, well, maybe this is going to take a little bit longer. But one of my sisters was actually in a college course, and it was specifically about nonprofits. And she met with her professor, and her professor said, "You don't need a lawyer. You don't need an accountant. You can do this on your own." So we did. We spent a weekend and we researched how people set up, how they fill out this IRS form that was 60 pages long, and we just did it ourselves. And people were like, "Oh, it takes so long for you to get approved." We made it right through the process. And we did have we did have a lawyer. Someone knew a lawyer that was willing to look over our paperwork, not fill it out for us, but just kind of look it over to make sure there wasn't any red flags. And it was fine, and we got approved. And so we did a chili fundraiser at a church to, start off with. And then we started a kickball tournament that we did our kickball tournament for 12 years. And that was kind of our first major fundraiser that gave us those funds to then start Monkey in My Chair. But I decided early on, starting the foundation, is research takes millions of dollars. And I was not going to have the capacity to raise millions of dollars. And so I knew I still wanted to help people, but I knew that it wasn't going to be just solely on research. And so that's kind of how Monkey in My Chair came about.
It's so beautiful. And again, what a testament to your scrappiness and just this figure it out. I mean, I feel like when you've had to navigate the world of DIPG and advocating for your kid, setting up a nonprofit, I'm sure in some ways feels easy because you know what it's like to operate with little resources. You know what it's like to kind of have the odds against you, because it wasn't like this was some proficiency that you had previous experience with. This was, you had to learn these skills. You had to figure this out.
Yeah. Well, and when your child's diagnosed with cancer, it's the way our medical field is, it's not like you just, oh, this hospital over here they specialize in that. It's like, you've got to get on the internet. You've got to search your doctor at your hospital. Like our doctor at our hospital, I mean, no fault on him, but he said the last patient he saw was a year previous and they chose no treatment. So he really had nothing to base it on as far as treatment and care, how to compare it. So you start doing that on your own and finding out which hospitals you can reach out to and where you can go and what research. And it's a lot. It's very overwhelming.
Sure. What is, as we wrap up here, Heidi, I'm curious, what is your biggest piece of advice for someone who may be in this DIPG journey right now?
I would say just reaching out to other people, connecting with other people. I think that that was something I didn't have during that journey. And I think that it's good to be able to connect with other people and understand. I remember going through that journey and then starting the foundation. And I remember in 2011, we had joined a collaborative to fund research. And Monkey in My Chair started in 2009 and was growing. And in 2011, when we went to the collaborative symposium, that was the first time I had met other families in person that had gone through the same journey as I had.
Wow.
And there was something about it. I was in a space where people knew what I went through. They understood. And so I would say for families, anytime you have that opportunity to be with other families, even though every situation is unique, every child's journey is different in some way, shape, or form. But being able to connect with other families that just get it. You can be in the room with them and you can say nothing and you still have a connection because you just know that, you've experienced that.
So Heidi, where can people find out more about both organizations if they're looking for more resources?
Absolutely. So Monkey in My Chair has monkeymychair.org. People can go there. And that is a program that goes nationwide. So we're located in Kansas, but we serve the entire United States through a Monkey in My Chair program, keeping children connected with their classmates so they can find out more information. If they have a child that needs a Monkey in My Chair, they can request one on our website. It's free to families. We do all the fundraising to make sure that the families don't have to pay anything and the hospitals don't pay anything to participate. And then through the Love Chloe Foundation, we also have our family support, which is restricted to the state of Kansas just because of limited funding that we have. But we're able to help families in the state with any sort of cancer. And Monkey in My Chair is also for any cancer, any childhood cancer. But our family support helps families financially. We do a warrior wagon with all sorts of items for the families. That's at lovechloe.org. And then we also do gas cards for the families since travel is a huge thing in the state of Kansas to get to treatment. We have some places in Kansas where they're traveling 6 hours one way just to get to the hospital.
Wow.
And that can be multiple times a month. So it's a huge deal to be able to, help these families and also just give them that direct family contact. Like every time we deliver a wagon, I meet a new family and they know they can reach out to me anytime if they have questions, even if it's a different diagnosis. I might be able to connect them with another family that maybe does have the same diagnosis. So we also plan some family days to get families together so they can be in person together and meet one another.
So wonderful, Heidi. Thank you for everything you do and turning this, really just a horrible tragedy into something beautiful for other families to feel supported along their own journey. It is really just a very beautiful thing to see what you've created out of this, out of your own heartbreak. And again, I think it's a testament to you and certainly a lasting legacy for Chloe. So thank you so much for joining us here today. As a final reminder for anyone that knows someone that is experiencing a cancer diagnosis or really any tough time, SupportNow is here to support, whether it's finding grants, helping fundraise, organize meals, coordinate volunteers. We understand that the journey for these families are overwhelming and communities want to help. They just need a place to do it. So always consider SupportNow as another resource for you on your journey. Thank you again, Heidi. I look forward to future talks.
Thank you. Have a good day.